Um, I will now come to Dr. Aniruddha Channal. Aniruddha, I think we will be playing a short clip from your film before I put my first question to you. Is someone from the Bengal Chamber ready to play the clip?
Yes, we will just start.
Who would have thought that the Bristol pilgrimage would bring me to Edinburgh? Ever since I saw the replica death mask in Calcutta, I wanted to see the original. Gala had established the fact that it had ended up in Edinburgh, possibly at the medical school. When I called around all the likely places, no one had heard of RamMohun Roy or his death mask. It was the modern marvel of the internet that finally came to my aid. By doing various searches with RamMohun and death mask, I was finally able to locate a site that was selling replica death masks for £250 to £450, literally per head. Amazingly enough, a replica of RamMohun Roy's death mask was also on this online catalogue. The site, belonging to the William Ramsay Henderson Trust, named Professor Matthew Kaufman as its contact. After several attempts, on the 27th of April 2004, an email from Professor Kaufman, University of Edinburgh Medical School, confirmed that the death mask was indeed in their possession, but on permanent loan to a storage facility of the Scottish National Portrait Gallery in Granton. An email from its custodians confirmed that the original death mask with the reference number and Rai, spelled Punjabi style with an I, was at the Granton facility. It took 6 months of negotiations via email and phone calls to secure the permission to see and film the mask, not in public view since 1886. Next morning, I arrived early in the desolate area near the waterfront. The impressively named Granton Art Centre was in fact only a storage facility. There are no exhibitions and it is not open to the public. As I wondered where I could get some coffee, my main contact person arrived.
Yes, you can.
Alan Barkis, a former policeman with a soft corner for the arts, looks after this facility. He was the person who 6 months ago had confirmed for me on the phone that the original plaster cast was indeed there. He had made the special visit on a Saturday with his wife when the facility was closed, just to help me out.
This death mask is not normally on display. I don't know if Anne will explain that to you, would you?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's okay, thanks.
Alan had taken the trouble to bring out the mask from the shelves to put it on display for filming from different angles. Finally, there it was, an exact image in 3 dimensions of this giant of the Indian Renaissance, within hours of his death 171 years ago. Even if photography had been invented by then, there would be no way to get such a complete picture of the Raja's appearance, but for this simple measure that belied the remarkable foresight of Dr. Eslin. It became apparent that the Calcutta mask was not a replica after all. The original showed somewhat smaller and asymmetric ears. It also seemed smaller in size, normal for a Bengali gentleman about 6 feet tall today, but perhaps big in volume for the period as reported in contemporary accounts. It seemed somewhat elongated from the side, as casts from the front and the back seemed to be imperfectly joined together. The study of the shape and protuberances of the head called phrenology, was popular in Scotland at the time. It was believed to reveal character and mental capacity. The Raja's head was charted and studied in great detail, very likely by noted phrenologists Gall and Combe, themselves immortalized by their own death masks. His head was believed to reveal traits of firmness, conscientiousness, self-esteem, and love of approbation. The last quality was believed to explain his chief flaw, which was his inability to say no, an Asian trait of acquiescence that sometimes put him in an awkward corner. Even there, Land Carpenter rose vehemently to his defense, explaining that that was part of his indulgent Eastern etiquette, and that no man stood more firmly in the face of adversity than the Raja when the situation truly demanded it. The phrenologists also found traits of secretiveness, combativeness, benevolence, and pessimism in him that they sought to reconcile with his life, and the attempt seems at once quaint and interesting, if not entertaining. His lack of veneration and wonder was believed to be the reason why he placed so little stock in the tales of miracle of any faith, and valued logical thinking above all else. Even though phrenology is now discredited as a science, the death mask of RamMohun, commissioned by his friends, belies the esteem they had for him and his deeds. The company he keeps in this extraordinary shrine speaks for itself. Samuel Johnson, Jonathan Swift, William Wordsworth, Walter Scott, Isambard Kingdom Brunel, Franz Joseph Haydn, Isaac Newton, as well as his friends in his mortal life, Jeremy Bentham, with whom he corresponded extensively, and William Roscoe. The anguish of the last breath drawn, sometimes still written on their faces. The Raja, by contrast, looks peaceful and recognizable from the Pyrenees Briggs portrait. The Peel portrait, showing a stout face, however, seems a poor likeness, unless it was commenced at a time when the Raja had put on weight, as reported by the Sanskrit scholar Wilson. Dr. Estlin did not record a rapid weight loss during his last illness. From the Edinburgh Castle that evening, while enjoying a panoramic view of the waterfront, called the Firth of Forth, where Granton is located, I bade goodbye to the death mask in its abode of quiet Scottish hospitality for nearly 2 centuries.
That was really touching, but can I just make one really stern comment to viewers who have tuned in? Please stop vandalizing the proceedings. What someone did by scribbling on that screen is just unacceptable. It's my request to the organizers to please take him off this live telecast immediately. Please do that. This cannot be repeated. This is absolutely unacceptable.
Absolutely, we are trying to find out the source.
To one of the greatest Indians who ever lived. I'm absolutely exasperated. I have no words of condemnation. My apologies. I'm really upset at what was clearly an attempt to sort of disfigure the proceedings and just the worst of what we are facing in India as a nation at this moment. Please stop doing these things. Honorable Dada, really sorry for my outburst. Let's talk about Raja RamMohun's impact on the West and his vision of Indian independence.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Debanjan, and I totally understand your outburst. I was quite astonished to see what was going on there. Thought at first it was possibly inadvertent, but it seemed later on to be quite deliberate. And just allow me to have a sip of coffee to just regain my composure. What I wanted to say is largely encapsulated in the video clip you saw, and hopefully, Debanjan, you'll be able to share the link not only to that clip but to the entire film. And I think it'll be a lot nicer to see without those scribblings.
Yes, that's exactly what we plan to do, Aniruddha.
Thank you so much. It became a painstaking sort of Georgian whodunit mission. And as I was posted in England at the time by my employer, and I had read that RamMohun Roy had died in Bristol. And that was about 80 miles from where I lived in Bracknell, which is England's Silicon Valley. And so I started to make trips. After my first trip, I got quite obsessed with it because every time I visited, it reaped a bumper crop of stories, almost forgotten or never seriously looked into, as well as a collection of portraits and likenesses of people associated with the Raja that brings his final days to life, such as his friend, the Unitarian minister, Land Carpenter, who had invited him to Bristol, John Bishop Estlin, who looked after him in his last and fatal illness, and whose diary helped the Calcutta neurosurgeon Ripin Bhomik determine the cause of the Raja's death. And Mary Carpenter, the daughter of Land, who recorded various details of Raja's stay in England, Catherine Castle, a wealthy heiress, who, along with her aunt Anne Kiddell, was the hostess of the Raja in Stapleton Grove, where he died and was initially buried before being exhumed 10 years later by Darkanath Tagore and reinterred in the Honorsville Cemetery. The relationship between India and Britain has for too long been viewed through the prism of the colonial encounter and the bruises that it left behind. And there's much written about it by Shashi Tharoor and others. I hardly need to go into that. But there is another side to this story, one of individuals, both Indian and British, who made something constructive out of the coming together of these two cultures, that it might be fair to say forever changed both nations. In many ways, this started with the Raja and his European friends. So my documentary reflects on the veneration that his British friends felt for the Raja, in sharp contrast with the condescension that might have been expected toward a visitor from a vassal state. As you saw, his death mask, which was commissioned by Dr. Estlin, because of course this was before photography, had been invented. But in some ways, we get a three-dimensional representation of his appearance that even a photograph would not have captured. And this was reserved for celebrities and people that were held in very high esteem. And if you see that clip again, not being distracted by those scribblings, you'll see the point I'm making is that he's get there with the greatest of the greats of British history, such as Sir Isaac Newton, and others, enumerated in the documentary. I won't take up time to repeat what's in the film. It's interesting to see, and in the people who studied his death mask, these were phrenologists, and of course, phrenology is now discredited as a science. But what's interesting is that they held him in such esteem that they felt it necessary to study how such a man was born in India. Of course, they had started to develop a great deal of condescension and disdain for the general Indian populace. And there are many comments in that report that I have read in detail, of which there is some allusion, or there are some allusions in the film, but not all. But they keep saying that, we're astonished that a man who can be compared with the greatest Europeans of our times was born amongst Hindus that have such, backward and benighted traditions. So that way he was viewed as, almost a godlike being. And so RamMohun interacted very positively with the British at the time. And, maybe there could be some criticism of that, of late there has been, and I'll address that. in a moment. But why he was held in such esteem and interacted so well with the British to improve the condition of his lot, and fought for such things as the abolition of sati and various land rights, etc., that we're all aware of. He was also the first visionary to have envisaged Indian independence, and this is something that's probably not that well known. But I will quote something that in Stephen Hayes's treatise on prominent 19th century Indians, there is this quote from Raja RamMohun Roy, where he says, "It should not be lost sight of that the position of India is very different from that of Ireland, to any quarter of which an English fleet may suddenly convey a body of troops that may force its way in the requisite direction and succeed in suppressing any effort of a refractory spirit. Were India to share 1/4 of the knowledge and energy of that country, i.e. Ireland, she would prove from her remote situation, her riches, and her vast population either useful and profitable as a willing province, an ally of the British Empire, or troublesome and annoying as a determined enemy." So that says it all. So people who think he was pro-British, etc., are very shallow. They do not understand the depth and breadth of his thinking. At the time, it is true that both he and Rabindranath Tagore, by the way, Rabindranath, a much misunderstood man, I have also a documentary on him on YouTube that you might consider looking at. With due respect, I beg to differ with Professor Chakraborti, who spoke before me, in terms of tradition and modernity, points about RamMohun Roy being confused, etc. I think those are overstatements, because it is very difficult for people to see what's wrong with their society while living in it. Many people saw sati every day, Brahmins like RamMohun, but it took RamMohun to stand up against it and fight his own kind, even his own mother, who took him to court, etc., as it's well known. So within that context, everybody has to be judged within the mores of their times. And we don't know what future generations will berate us for. Maybe for eating meat or having other animals as pets, or frivolous expenses on gadgets and vacations and so on, while there is widespread starvation and suffering. So every person must be judged within the context of their times. We can't say Shakespeare was anti-Semitic because he portrayed a character like Shylock. 400 years later, those sorts of comments can trip very easily off our tongues. But if you were living then, like RamMohun was living in the 1800s, he was right to see the British as a force for good, because we were burning our widows while they were preaching a religion of love and tolerance and equality. So he was absolutely right at the time to work with the British rulers to have this evil practice eradicated. Now, we can sit today in 2021 and nitpick with, where he might have been a little too pro-British or in favor of Western education versus Sanskrit education that might have perpetuated the benighted nature of our society. So he was working, he and Rabindranath were both working within the context of their times. And before 1857, before imperial arrogance set in, positive things were being done by Indians and British people collaborating. The Asiatic Society was being formed. The first multinational corporation, Karan Tagore, was established. So we have to see it in that context. And back then, they did not have the data. Neither RamMohun nor Rabindranath had the data to know that there would never be equality before the British. That started to become apparent much later. And obviously, the independence movement started. But it's not so well known that while RamMohun was engaging constructively with the British, he also saw, as is evident from the quote I just gave you, that this could go off the rails and become a problem. And in that situation, the British would find themselves at a disadvantage. As he says, that you can work with us, and we would be a willing and friendly ally, or we could become a very determined enemy. The same sort of thing happened in the American War of Independence. Prior to that, Benjamin Franklin envisioned a United States of Europe, and alliance between Britain and America, until he was severely humiliated during a court case and he turned against the British Empire. So RamMohun and Darkanath saw a future with British rule that seemed positive to him. And Blair King, who was one of the greatest experts on Darkanath Tagore and RamMohun, in his book about Darkanath Tagore, calls him partner in empire. There's a reason why he chose that title. These men, at the time, saw the British as a positive force, as a liberating force. And, it's well known, and, I might make myself a bit unpopular by saying this, but at the end of the Battle of Plassey, if you read William Dalrymple's book, Anarchy, people heaved a sigh of relief when the reign of Siraj-ud-Dowlah, who was an absolute debauch, ended. And at the time, the East India Company seemed to be a little bit better in comparison. So, these are, of course, complex topics to get into. But I would say that I would disagree that Indians were in a hurry to find a hero. And so they extolled RamMohun Roy into a father of modern India, and no Renaissance ever happened. These are just, undeserved bits of cynicism, in my opinion. And with that, I'll get off my soapbox. That's all I wanted to say. I don't want to go on, but I would once again urge you to side by side see, not side by side, but one after the other, see my documentaries on RamMohun Roy as well as Darkanath Tagore. I think I was very fortunate to be able to discover many long forgotten things about these men. As you saw, the death mask, that's not so well known. People know very well about RamMohun's campaign to start newspapers and abolish sati and so forth. But what happened to him after he went to England and died 3 years after that, that has been shrouded in mystery or sort of, not that much awareness. And I was fortunate to be able to dig up some stories relating to that. So I would, as the expression goes, a picture is worth 1,000 words. I think motion picture is worth even more. So I'd urge everybody to see the documentary and
thank you.
In your comments.
Thank you so much, Aniruddha. And I'm really delighted that we are not converging. We are agreeing to disagree. I think that is something that RamMohun would have been himself very proud of, I think. So look forward to an exchange between you and Ranjunda a short while from now. And I think as you were talking about, especially that clip that we saw about phrenology, I was reminded of, Sherlock Holmes. Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes is very interested in phrenology, if you remember from more popular fiction. And it was very good to see references to some of my colleagues in Scotland being referred to in your documentary. So I really look forward to watching the documentary in full, as well as the one on Darkanath, because we are working quite closely with many colleagues and friends in the UK who are working to preserve Bengali history and heritage in the UK. So we will have further conversations.